Hi, my name is Maribel Duran, and I serve as member of the Board of Trustees for Southern New Hampshire University. I also serve as secretary of the board, and I'm really proud to say that I'm an alumni, class of 2016.
What did you get your degree in?
English literature.
What prompted you to go for that degree?
I think a number of reasons, and one is a very just sort of my passion in terms of what I want to do and what I love to do. The other is very practical. I love English literature. I love reading. I love writing. And that was something that I just thought I would love just spending hours and doing and just reading all sorts of literature, right? The very practical reason is I needed to graduate. And I know that sounds kind of, maybe a shortcut kind of a version, but I needed to graduate. And I remember early on when I spoke to the advisor when I was enrolling at Southern New Hampshire University, we also just looked realistically at what my life looked like at the time. I'm a single mother of two, work full time, and the advice I was in between choosing different pathways and different degrees, and my advisor very wisely asked me, and said, "You're going to be tired at the end of the day. You're going to be coming home and doing homework at night, and it's going to be hard. So let's not sugarcoat it. So what is going to prompt you and compel you and motivate you to open that book? What is going to keep you really interested?" And it was a no-brainer when she framed it that way. And that is another reason why I chose literature, because I said, okay, at the end of the day, I'm not going to mind, reading this and doing the homework when it came to, English literature. So that's the other very practical reason of why I chose it.
Sounds like a great advisor.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's Hispanic Heritage Month, which starts mid-September, running in course till mid-October. What does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you and also to your family?
It's a really good question. So, what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to me? I have to be honest, it wasn't something we celebrated growing up. I don't really think my family, my parents at least, are very familiar with the concept. It's something that I grew to appreciate more so in my professional career later on. Growing up, and it was something that just wasn't, something that we knew of. And mostly, I think because we're Latino, my parents are, immigrants from Mexico, and I lived in a predominantly Mexican American neighborhood in Chicago. And so everybody around me was Latino, everybody around me was Hispanic for the most part. So it wasn't that we needed a month necessarily to celebrate our culture and ourselves. We did that year round. Like there was no, we didn't need an excuse basically, or a designation. The designation itself, and you might know this, was really, I think, became a thing in the late 1980s by President George H.W. Bush. But I think now, as an adult, and again through my professional career, it is something that I do appreciate. It's much more, I think, lifted and recognized in professional circles or in academia, in universities, and I really appreciate it because I think it's an opportunity for us to hone in on what the contributions have been from Hispanic and Hispanic Americans and Latinos around the country. I think in some ways it's an opportunity to lean in and to learn about what these different communities are and the contributions they've made to the country, whether it's from the food that we have on our table to the small businesses that we start and run every single day in this country. I also think it's an invitation for us to lean in and to also understand the disparities or the inequities that a lot of Hispanic Americans still continue to face in this country, whether that's in education, whether that's access to financial resources, opportunities for careers and jobs. So all of this, I think it prioritizes a conversation as a country for us to really understand what this means for the different Latino communities in this country.
Excellent. How do you think Hispanic Heritage Month can help foster a sense of belonging for Hispanic Latinx students here at SNHU?
I have to say that I'm really proud to be a member of this board. And the reason is because the conversation around uh, what supports, what tools, what environment, what a healthy, inclusive environment can look like, both in person or online, which is what I did. I was an online student. I think that one, it's really heartening to be a part of a conversation that, frankly, is evergreen as part of the board, right? You know, we constantly talk about what is it, what does this look like, what are the investments that we can continue to make. Um, so that's something that we do for all students, in particular for the Latino students as well and other students of color. So that is something that again shows up in every conversation. I think it's also important to recognize the efforts that Southern New Hampshire University has made in this space, whether it's building community, whether it's fostering relationships, whether it's ensuring that there are educational resources to better understand the nuances of the different needs and the lived experience, because I can't underestimate or understate that enough in terms of just a different lived experience of all of our students, right? And Latino students, excuse me, they're not a monolith, right? And so I think understanding the difference of a first generation, Latino student that is entering, school for the first time compared to the needs of, like I was a single parent, someone who had navigating the career environment already in the work, professional workspace, understanding what those needs are is just so critical to fostering and enabling student success. So I think what Southern New Hampshire University has continued to do is to make those visible, make those communities visible, right? And to make sure that as a university, you're saying, we see you, we hear you, and we're going to support you in all of these different ways. So I think that's incredibly important.
Oh, for sure. This year's theme is Pioneers of Change. Who have the pioneers been that have influenced your life?
I take a deep sigh because I try not to get emotional when I think about the pioneers, and I sort of think of like my parents, right? My parents came from Mexico years ago. My father was only 16 when he got to the United States. He has no more than a second grade education. And my mother also went as far as, elementary school. And they came to the United States, like many people, looking for opportunity for a better life outcome. And they didn't know the language, and they were able to navigate just so many different barriers. And at the end of it all, able to provide for their three daughters. And I think of them and I think of so many others who have a shared history in this country and, now have an opportunity to give back. That is why I, for example, have committed my life to public service because of that. But I don't, I can't imagine. We've had conversations as a family about what that, journey was. And I'm in awe, basically. Like it's hard for me some days to show up at, in the office and, have really hard meetings and make really difficult decisions. And oftentimes when I'm talking to my parents, like I'm humbled immediately. Obviously context matters, but I'm humbled, and it's sobering to think of what their journey was like when they got to the States and how they had to navigate the workplace, not knowing the language, not knowing really much anything about the workplace, but they were here, they did hard work. They were very active in the community and gave back in whatever shape or form they could.
Do you see yourself as a pioneer of change? And if so, why?
Do I see myself as a pioneer of change? I think my instinct would say no. And no, I don't. However, if I spend more time thinking about that, I will share this week in particular, I was at an event, a Hispanic Heritage Month event at the United States Department of Agriculture where I used to work. And it was a lovely event. And we were celebrating heritage, right? We were celebrating the contributions of Latinos in this country. And in one of the conversations, I was surrounded by a number of Latina women. And we were talking about, what it's like to be in some of these positions of power or in a high ranking role within the government or in the private sector or nonprofit, and talked about how lonely it is sometimes. And there was a lot of reflection, and it resonated deeply with me that, oftentimes, and I've shared this in other spaces too, oftentimes I'm the only still. I'm, the only woman, the only, woman of color, the only Latina. in a lot of spaces, and that can be just lonely. And sort of like sometimes you sort of feel like this huge imposter syndrome. Do I really belong here? Do I really, have what it takes? And in talking to these women, I think we share that in common. We sort of talked about these shared experiences. And at the same time, we talked about the, the opportunity we have in these roles to sort of, maybe start a new path and to do things differently. And what I mean by that is I bring a set of lived experiences that perhaps no one else in the room does. And while I cannot speak for the Latino community as a whole, I can talk about the experiences I've had as a Latina. And whether it's through education, whether it's in my professional career, I think that is really enriching and can bring a different perspective and a diversity of perspective too when we have problems to solve. There's tons of research that says that the more diverse a team, the better the outcomes. And so I think that's something that is a good reminder for all of us that, feel like we're the onlys in lots of rooms. In a place like Washington, D.C., there's no shortage of that sometimes, unfortunately. So in that sense, I feel like I am a pioneer because I'm trying different things and I'm bringing different things and different values and different, perhaps, skill sets to the table that I hope contribute to a team that's already making really good impact.
As you were speaking and reflecting on whether you were truly a pioneer or not, I couldn't help but think about the emotion you had in thinking about your parents and thinking about your own children speaking of all of your accomplishments and the emotion they would feel as well, and considering you as a pioneer.
Thank you for that. So you're gonna make me cry.
It's remarkable. Sometimes we don't see all that we've accomplished. So, about a decade ago, you served as the Chief of Staff for the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics for several years. What did that role mean to you? And what messaging did you most want to deliver during that time that still resonates strongly with you today?
I can't believe it's been a decade ago. So yeah, I served as Chief of Staff for the White House Initiative. Um, I was thinking back in terms of where I was in my life, and in some ways, it's right around the same time I went back to school to Southern New Hampshire University. So I enrolled in school and I started this role. So I think those two things were just incredibly critical and sort of catapulted me into just a different way of thinking and showing up in the world. The work that we did at the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics was really important because I felt like we were a conduit to the Latino community across the United States. And what we did was we worked, at the time for the Obama administration. And we went on the road and we met with hundreds of people all over the country and in Puerto Rico to talk about what it means to have educational success. What does it mean to, live to your full potential? So we met with teachers, professors, families, students, philanthropy, academia, government officials to talk about what the Obama administration was doing on behalf of Latino students. And oftentimes what we encountered was a disconnect. And it was in some ways truth telling to say, that sounds really nice in DC, but in the real world, here's how this is landing. And that was really important to also bring back to DC to say, it's not getting through. We have an opportunity to continue to find ways to communicate and engage meaningfully. And then two, we need to understand what they're saying and bring this real feedback back to ensure that our policies and what we're implementing truly reflect the nuances and the needs and the lived experiences of these students. So that was really important. And I carry that with me in a lot of the different roles that I have. I will share one anecdote too that I think it also colors the way that I show up in the world too. In one of those meetings, we had an opportunity to meet with some media representatives. I won't say which one or with who, but it was a really sobering conversation because we brought to the table a lot of the feedback that we were hearing from people and students, for example, in Texas and in Arizona and California. And we sort of said, here's what they care about. Students and families, they care about STEM education. They care about early childhood. They want to have their children graduate. They care about standardized test scores. They had lots of questions around that, right? They care about that they have more than one counselor in their school for hundreds of students. And so we were bringing this real feedback to these in this meeting, and we were met with, well, that's fine, but we want to talk about immigration. And I think that for me illustrates sometimes that the community itself, one, it's not a monolith that I've mentioned before, but that we're often painted as a one issue community, right? And we are a vast and diverse, diaspora that cares about a lot of these issues, about all of the issues, because in my mind, Latino issues are American issues. And oftentimes what you see is that we're pigeonholed in these boxes as one issue community, or that we only understand one issue. And that's further, from the truth. So that was really sobering to me. And that is why when I've worked at the Department of Agriculture and now at the Farm Credit Administration, which is a financial regulator, it is so important for me to continue to, dispel some of those myths, to say, actually, Latinos are everywhere and they care about so many different things.
You touch upon education in almost every response. Why is education important for yourself, your children, and for everyone?
So I consider myself a lifelong learner. Um, and I see education in different ways. I mean, there's the formal education, and obviously, I did that. I have my bachelor's degree, and I sit on the board of Southern New Hampshire University. So I'm a staunch believer that education should be accessible to everybody. I also truly believe that education doesn't stop once you graduate, that you continue to learn in the workplace and with your friends, with your family, at the place of worship in your community. So education really comes in different shapes and forms. And I always, I have two kids, and the conversations we've had around the kitchen table is really about, how are you learning? What did you learn about that, situation, or what did you learn about yourself, right? And it's through having difficult conversations. It's through being in collaboration with people that are unlike you, that have nothing in common with you, or grew up very wildly different. Those are the times where I think we learned so much about how the world works, how the workplace works. So to me, like, that is something that I continue to do, every day. I'll give you another example. I mentioned that I worked at the Department of Agriculture and now at the Farm Credit Administration. I knew nothing really about agriculture. I knew about food, I knew about farms, but I didn't know anything about really agriculture, and surely about finance and access to credit. But all of these issues are interconnected. And so I made sure that, okay, so what does education look like for me in this role? What do I have to learn to be able to be effective? And so whether it comes through a vocational school, a community college, a university, the workplace, you continue to get certifications along the way. Like, I truly believe that in order to be effective, you need to continue learning.
You've had quite a journey with Southern New Hampshire University. What initially led you to SNHU?
It was, so I had been in, at the time, three different schools. It took me about 17 years to graduate, and I feel like it was a lifetime ago, but I went to different schools trying to make it work. And I felt like my education was sort of in stints. It was, paused because of life. Life gets in the way. And then you start again and it gets paused again, whether it's an illness or something came up. And I was having a conversation precisely at the Department of Education with a dear friend who happened to be the Assistant Secretary of Vocational and Adult Education. And I was telling her that I didn't have a college degree. And at the time, there's a lot of shame around that, right? And I wanted to complete, but I just didn't know. Every time I tried, I just hit, some bumps in the road and just wasn't able to make it happen. And she actually suggested I look into Southern New Hampshire University. I had never heard of it. I felt very embarrassed because here I was working at the Department of Education, and I felt like I should know all the things. But that evening I went home and I started researching, and I went on the website and I submitted an inquiry and immediately got a phone call and started talking about, well, this is what Southern New Hampshire University is, and this is what we do to support students. And that phone call, I think, changed my life really, because immediately I was like, oh, okay, it's really flexible, and perhaps it can fit into the shape of my life right now. And so that's sort of the conversation that started this journey.
When you think back to then, could you ever imagine you would one day be on the board of trustees?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I remember quite vividly the morning of graduation, sort of getting ready. And so I did the 12 hour, I should say, drive from Washington, D.C. to New Hampshire because, I love the experience, and being an online student was helpful to me. That made sense in my life. But when it came to graduation, I knew that I wanted to be surrounded by people, and that it was so important to me to cross the stage and to shake the hands and to, do the toss of the hat, like all of the things that you see on TV. I wanted to do that because I worked so hard at it. And so drove to New Hampshire. And that morning, I received a message saying that President LeBlanc wanted to meet me before graduation. And I was nervous. And at one point, we're driving to the arena, and somehow I tossed my phone out the window. It was a chaotic morning. I lost my phone, but I met him, and it started a wonderful friendship. And I see him as a mentor and a friend. But it started a conversation about my journey, and again, those lived experiences. And, a year later, I had the opportunity to give a commencement speech, which was amazing. I did the TED Talk as well to talk about my life as well, and lots of lessons learned. So, Southern New Hampshire University has really opened the door in many ways, and I keep going back to the things that I continue to learn about myself. And now, being on the board since 2017, has been another learning opportunity that never stops, and an incredible honor.
So kind of leads into, how do you show up in the world each day, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the imposter syndrome, right? And I was looking at my daughter. So my daughter is 13, and she's on her phone and loves to look at photos from years ago. And the other day, she was looking at photos from 2015 and 2016. And I saw myself and immediately remembered how I used to feel sometimes during those days, certainly before my degree. Um, and there were so many times where I felt like I didn't belong. Which is something that really was a thread for a lot of my time, in Chicago and then in DC, those early years. I didn't feel like I had what it took. I felt like I was an imposter. I was surrounded by people who had been in DC for such a long time, who were policy whizzes, who went to Ivy League schools, and here I was, a high school graduate, right, with no college degree, shoulder to shoulder with them. So I sort of felt like I was in a shell, like I was smaller, right? And over the years, I think what I've done is to reframe that in my head, right? Which I talk about at the TED Talk, like rewriting your own narrative. And part of what I say is you can't be what you can't see. So there's been a couple of things that I think have happened over the last, 15 years that I've been in DC. Is one, I surround myself with amazing, amazing Latina women who are incredible. I always tell them, like, you could run the world if you'd like to. But it brings a sense of community and understanding, deep understanding of the trials and tribulations that we've all sort of had and faced. So that is incredibly important, to surround yourself with this sort of kitchen cabinet. and the sisterhood. The other is that I've reframed that in my head to say, gosh, I stood shoulder to shoulder with these Harvard, Ivy League professionals, and I had a high school degree, right? And so that to me has been really empowering to say, I've always, had the things, I've always had the tools, but I've grown much more with confidence that I've needed. And really leaned into the resilience I've had and all of those lived experience to say, I actually do belong, right? And not only for me, but I think what also motivates me is that it's important that while I might feel like, it's really lonely, or, like I said, oftentimes I am the only, that it's important for others to see me in these spaces. And so when I've had a really hard day at work, when I've had a really tough day, I have to remind myself that I'm going to stick with it because others are, who look like me are seeing me in these roles, and that I can't give up so easily. So, I drink the coffee in the morning and I just, sort of shrug the previous day and I keep going, because I think that's important for me to also show that, yeah, it is scary when you have all these scars, but it's important to continue to show up because it's bigger than me.
What advice would you give to prospective Hispanic Latinx students who are really thinking college just isn't for them? It's not possible.
It's hard. It's such a personal decision too, and oftentimes it's a decision that's not made lightly by a family, right? And I will say that college may not be for everybody, but it certainly should be accessible to everybody who wants to go to college. And again, and I say college, but it can be a vocational school. We talked about community college. It could be a university, study abroad, whatever. For me, it was such a personal goal that I go to college. And again, it took me 17 years, and that was my journey. So I would say have that conversation. And if that is something that you see yourself doing, do your research. There are so many different tools out there. There are so many different ways to support, whether it's financial support, scholarships, grants, work study opportunities. Have a conversation with the university or the college that you're looking into, right? And say, here's my circumstance. What can you do to help? I really want to go here and I want to graduate. I want to contribute. And you'd be surprised. There are so many different, there are schools out there that will help you and say, here's the package, here's what we're willing to do. I will always say that it is the best investment I made, right? Loans can be scary, right? And spending all this money can be scary. And sometimes we don't have it. I didn't have it, right? And this was me working for the White House. I didn't have the means, right? But that was the biggest, probably the most single important investment I've made in myself. So, have those conversations. I know that sometimes parents get scared by that commitment, that financial commitment, or to have their child move away. That's also scary. But I think just knowing yourself and making sure that you're reaching out for help, and perhaps there are others who've walked that path that you can get in touch with, so you can ask the advisor or the counselor to say, can you connect me with someone who I can talk to about how they've navigated it? There are so many different resources out there.
What did it mean to your parents when you did graduate from Southern New Hampshire University?
Ooh, um, it meant a lot. Um, I often joke that my parents don't know what I do. um, I'm like, well, I'm the chief of staff here. Well, that's great. You have a job. Like that's sort of what they understand. But graduation, they did understand. And I try to be. I remember the night before graduation, I hadn't decorated my hat, and my daughter helped me, and we ended up writing my mom's name on it. Um, Her name is Esperanza, which means hope. Um, and it was really important for me to honor my mom in that way, because she wanted to keep studying. She wanted to continue her education, and she just was not able to, at the time. Again, it happens in so many different families and different cultures. and communities where, women are told that they are meant to be the wives and the mothers and the caretakers. And so that was the message she received. So for me, it was really important that I honor her in that way and that we continue, that she may not have been the one crossing the stage, but, that she was with me along the way.
What a full circle moment. You honored your mom and your daughter helped you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, and it's so wonderful to see you and to do this with you, Pam.
Oh, for sure. I so appreciate it.